Okay, people will join. Good. All right, so thank you everybody for joining. We're just going to wait a couple more minutes until people show up. Yeah, Avi, where are you physically located? And Michelle, while we're waiting for people to join.
I'm located half the way between Tel Aviv and Haifa.
Has it been pretty quiet there in the last few days, or have you been close to?
Today at 4 o'clock, I had an interview to one of the news network, and then we had to stop it because there was a siren. So,
Wow.
yeah. So, I mean, last night I was kind of like, I was looking at the interceptions, and you could see the debris going down. It's amazing. It's like, like a Hollywood movie, but it's not a movie.
Terrifying.
Yeah,
And where are you, Michelle?
yeah.
Hi, everyone. I am currently located on a moshav outside of Ashdod. And we too have had a busy night last night and a siren this afternoon. But the sun is shining and life goes on to the extent possible here. And we are very happy to be able to share some of this important information with you. Thank you so much to Avi for joining us today. And thank you so much to the people who are Zooming in. I see that participants continue to be added, so we may want to give it 1 or 2 more minutes yet here as the Zoom lets them in. We have hundreds of people registered to participate in this important webinar.
Yeah, we'll wait 1 more minute and then we're going to get going.
Great, because we know people are anxious to hear what Avi has to share. I will say that we have AJMA is here in Israel. We had 2 missions scheduled to start this week. One with medical students, only a few of which made it here. The rest, the mission was canceled. And we have a trauma mission for psychologists, the Eileen Serlin Zichronella Racha trauma mission for psychologists with AJMA. And we have 8 members of that mission on the ground in Israel. And the resilience and courage and flexibility and humor that they've all been displaying, I think they're absorbing it from the Israelis around them. And it's been a beautiful experience to see. So
thank
an
you for all
unforgettable mission for sure.
It sounds like it. All right. So Avi, Michelle, thank you for both of you for joining us in a very quick turn of events. And welcome everybody to this important webinar on Father's Day. So happy Father's Day for everybody here. And I'll start by saying that, these last few days were very difficult, very scary for a lot of Israelis, Jews all over the world. There's a lot of misinformation. People don't exactly know what is happening. And because of this, we also see many Zooms in the last few days, including today, of different experts. But I do think that we're very lucky to have Avi Melamed here, and Michelle is going to introduce him in a minute, because not only that he is knowledgeable, but he has taken on himself a mission for hasbara, to go all around the United States, again and again, and explain and, give the information that people need so desperately in order to understand everything that is happening in the Middle East. So Michelle is going to introduce, but I'm going to introduce Michelle first. So my name is Yair, by the way. I'm here from the area of Philadelphia. And Michelle is the Chief Executive Officer of the American Jewish Medical Association. And the AJMA is a relatively new organization just in the last couple of years after October 7th. The AJMA is, first of all, very importantly, non-political, non-profit, nationwide organization that represents all the Jewish healthcare professionals and students, psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers, physicians, dentists, and more and more and more. And the mission of the organization is to build an empowered community of Jewish healthcare professionals. Like I said, it doesn't have to be only physicians, it could be even researchers and hospital chaplains, public health. And all of us are committed to the combating discrimination and anti-Semitism by promoting merit and excellence. The members of AJMA stand firmly with Israel, uphold the Jewish values in medicine, and advocate for fairness and respect across the healthcare landscape. And we're going to share with you in the chat ways to join and to get involved in the AJMA, even if you're not healthcare providers. And just a couple of words of Michelle before I turn it over to her. She is the former CEO and co-founder of Two Unstoppable, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to inspiring and providing oncology exercise for women. And she has been the CFO and CEO and leadership of so many different organizations, especially to represent and help the Jewish population. And recently, in the last 2 years, as I said, she was elected as the CEO of the AJMA, and she's been doing an incredible job to spread the mission and recruit more people to our organization. So Michelle, Avi, thank you very much. I'm passing it to you, Michelle.
Thank you so much, Yair, and thank you for all you do to help organize these webinars and make it happen. We appreciate all of your advocacy. Welcome, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here. As I said earlier, I am here speaking to you from Eretz Yisrael, and we had a couple of AJMA missions to Israel scheduled for this week, and some of us are already on the ground here. And so we've had an, let's say, eventful few days, but I'm grateful to be here and grateful to be able to share information with all of you. As Yair said, the AJMA is a nonprofit organization. It's a membership association that has basically casts a wide net for all healthcare professionals. So all Jewish healthcare professionals are welcome to join the AJMA at this critical time in Jewish history. We were founded in response to the alarming rise in anti-Semitism following October 7th of 23. AJMA has been dedicated to supporting Jewish healthcare providers and ensuring the safety, dignity, and productivity of the Jewish community within medicine. AJMA is a coalition of Jewish and non-Jewish healthcare professionals, physicians, medical students, nurses, allied health workers, really anyone who works in healthcare across the spectrum, the training spectrum, so from medical student to retiree, across all disciplines in healthcare, and across all the Jewish spectrum and across the United States. So again, we cast a wide net, and I promise if you go on our website, and I'll share the information shortly, there's a membership category for you. Even if you're not a Jewish healthcare professional or trainee, there's a category called Friends of AJMA, and I urge you to join and support our mission. We're a coalition working to promote merit-based advancement, ethical leadership, and the right to equal treatment regardless of background. Our members, as Yair said, stand firmly with Israel, and we are here to talk about that. We uphold Jewish values in medicine, and we advocate for fairness and respect across the healthcare landscape. Anti-Semitism, including anti-Zionism, is no longer a distant threat. They impact workplaces, patient care, and the well-being of our members. AJMA serves as the single nationwide voice addressing these challenges within the U.S. medical community. Now it is my pleasure and my honor to introduce Avi Melamed, who's going to be providing us with some critical information on really a last-minute emergency basis about what's going on the ground and in the region. Avi Melamed is a geopolitical Middle East expert, intelligence analyst, former Israeli intelligence official, and senior Arab affairs advisor. He is the founder of Inside the Middle East, Intelligence Perspective, ITME, an apolitical, non-partisan educational nonprofit institute. Avi is the author of 3 books on the region. His recent book is Inside the Middle East, Entering a New Era. Avi's also the author, producer, and host of The Seam Line, a 5-part docuseries exploring the many layers of the conflict in and over Jerusalem. His newest film, Inside the Middle East, The Primer, is designed to provide a Western audience with an understanding of geopolitical factors shaping the region. ITME's newest initiative, Voices from the Middle East About the Middle East, is an international fellowship for motivated undergraduate and graduate students. Avi is fluent in Hebrew, Arabic, and English, but tonight he'll be presenting to us in English. He's a frequent commentator on international media platforms such as Al-Arabiya, BBC Arab and English, Bloomberg, CBC, and Reuters. He is a permanent contributor to USA Today. If any of you have heard him speak before, you know we're in for a treat and for some really valuable and meaningful information about what's going on and what it means for the region. Avi, thank you so much for being here.
Michelle, Yair, thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, shalom from Israel. Right now, it's late afternoon in Israel towards sunset. I hope that you're all well. We're going to talk, of course, about Israel-Iran war. We are today, June 15th. This is day 3 of this war. I'm using this title, war, because it is a war. And what I would like to do in our session today is to explore with you a couple of aspects of this thing from a regional perspective. We'll try first to understand some general framing that I think is enormously significant to understand why and how did we get to this point. The other thing, of course, is trying to understand right now some major aspects of what is going right now, exactly when I'm talking to you, and finally trying to assess at this moment where things are heading to, possibly, potentially, at least in the foreseeable future. Let me start with some general framing. In almost 40 years ago or more, there is a significant pivotal moment in the Middle East. There is an Islamic revolution in Iran. Iran becomes a Shiite theocracy under the leadership of the Mullah regime. This is a very radical regime that has been since then have been proactively advancing his vision to become a dominant hegemonic power in the region. To that end, the regime has been establishing a triangle of power that is based upon 3 major components. One is its nuclear program. The other one is an advanced and evolving missiles and drones capacities, including ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, hypersonic missiles, and so on and so on. And the third leg, local proxies, a network of armies of terror scattered across the Middle East. You may be familiar with some, like the Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas and Islamic Jihad, the Palestinians in Gaza Strip and the West Bank, Iraqi Shiite militias, Houthis, and so on and so on. The interesting thing about this triangle is that it has been acting as what I call the ultimate insurance policy of this regime, meaning each and every one of the components of this triangle act as the mutual beneficial or mutual securing factor of the other 2 components. The nuclear program is supposed to shelter the 2 other programs not to be damaged. The local proxies mission is to defend the other 2 aspects. The missiles and drones also are supposed to be a deterrence card that basically shelter the other 2 components. So it's a very sophisticated equation model that has been enormously successful, unfortunately. Because when you look at the story of the region for the last 40 years, you realize that as far as the Iranian regime concerned, it has been up until recently in a win-win situation. All those components acting, synchronizing their activities, providing the ultimate insurance and protection to the Mullah regime, and as a fact, that regime has inflicted an enormous death and destruction across the Middle East under the title of a banner or a slogan that became unfortunately quite romanticized in some Western circles called the resistance. And under this banner has inflicted an enormous death and destruction in the Middle East, while at the same time this regime has remained totally immune from any kind of ramifications for its disastrous policy. What we are looking right now is a very interesting and pivotal moment, because for the first time almost in the last 40 years, when you are taking out the 8 years of the 1970s, sorry, the 1980s, when the regime was engaged in a war with Iraq, for the first time in the last 40 years, the Mullah regime in Tehran now sustained an enormous ramifications to its aggression. Obviously, we are looking at the situation of the war with Israel. The opening or the milestone leading to that point happened almost 2 years ago in an event that you are all familiar with, October 7. October 7, an attack that was launched by Hamas and Islamic Jihad from Gaza Strip, 2 major components of this Iranian proxies network, basically resulted in what we call domino effect that leads to the moment where we are exactly right now. In a nutshell, this domino effect is that in the end of 2025, what we saw was that actually the axis of resistance, this network of proxies, one of the most significant legs in this triangle of deterrence that the Mullah regime has been so effectively using, the axis of resistance, this major leg in this Iranian stool basically has been significantly weakened. This is something that is enormously significant to understand, because that basically has opened a window of opportunity, strategically speaking, leading to the point where, together with the increasing challenges of the Iranian regime inside Iran, stemming from an increasing social, economic, environmental challenges, given the fact that majority of the Iranian people are very resentful of this oppressive regime, and together with the fact that there is a US administration, a new administration, Trump administration, its second term, that imposed biting sanctions on the mullah regime, the combination of these three factors, the weakening of the axis of resistance, the challenges of the Iranian regime from home domestically, and the increasing sanctions by the Trump administration, resulted in, right now, a significant strategic window of opportunity that, to a large extent, was one of the major reasons, not the only one, but one of the major reasons that actually, in the end of the day, encouraged Israeli government to take this significant step and to launch a military move in order to try and to address the Iranian nuclear threat. It's very significant to understand this component, because we also should remember that in parallel to that, at the same period of time, the international agency, Nuclear International Agency, basically formally published a report stating that the Iranian regime has basically defined its commitments to cooperate. In other words, what we saw was that all the ducks kind of like sitting are in the same row, and that was one of the major reasons for the Israeli government decision to launch this military move. And right now we are on day 3 of that military move, Israeli-Iran war. So that has been some sort of like a general framing to understand, roughly speaking, where we are right now. And now let's talk a little bit about the Israeli military tactic, at least as we witness it so far. When you look at the Israeli military tactic, you are looking at a blueprint that has been very sophisticatedly, very well thoroughly put in order to be able to maximize as much as possible the first part or the first phase of this military action. And that blueprint incorporates different actions that are based upon some inner logic, that each and every one of them serves, in the end of the day, a different purpose, but all in all together, they are all combining to create a fabric that is comprehensive, that is cohesive. One of the first things that happens during the Israeli immediate attack in the night between Thursday and Friday was to take out most of the senior commanders of the Iranian military establishment. The Iranian military establishment has different factors. The most significant one are, first, the Islamic Revolutionary Guards, IRGC, and the Iranian army. These are two different entities, but they're of course part of the same regime. The Israeli strike takes most of the leadership of both the Iranian army as well as the Islamic Revolutionary Guards. The other thing that Israel is doing, which is not less significant, is taking out center of knowledge, and we are talking about particularly scientists, Iranian scientists that are rather operating under the name of what is known as the Group of Armament. This is a group of the core of the center of the Iranian know-how, knowledge, expertise, how to weaponize nuclear capacities. This is the most significant component in the whole Iranian nuclear program. In other words, the ability to take the capacity of a nuclear military weapon and to translate it to a real weapon, maybe mainly to ensemble, sort of speaking, a nuclear weapon on a warheads. This is the most significant and final process in the whole procedure. The people that have been taken out so far, as of today, we are talking about 14 or 15 Iranian scientists from different disciplines, were the core of this whole process. This is the group of armament that thus far has been taken out by the first Israeli strikes. The second thing that happens, and again, we are looking at a modular, comprehensive action or blueprint, was to focus first and foremost with two major nuclear sites of Iran. One is in Natanz and the other one in Isfahan, roughly speaking, both in the center and western part of Iran. Natanz is the nuclear place where the enriching of uranium took place. Isfahan is the place where the uranium is being transferred to as a liquid situation or position and then transformed into a solid shape, which is one stage beyond the producing of a nuclear military weapon or military bomb, to be more accurate. So the first immediate thing that the Israeli Air Force has been doing in the night between Thursday and Friday and the day following was to attack those specific two sites. The purpose beyond that is to, for now, to slow, to break up, to push back the Iranians' current situation, basically to pose some sort of like a block or a hold in the process of not only the enriching of the uranium, but basically also the transformation of the uranium from a liquid position into a solid one, and hence the priority that has been given to that. The other thing that has been done parallel to that has been the attacks on the Iranians' anti-aerial radars and ballistic missiles in different parts of Iran. The logic beyond that has two major perspectives. One is to try and to minimize as much as possible the expected Iranian reaction, retaliation, mostly through the launching of missiles, ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, drones, and so on and so on. And the other military rationale beyond that is to create an Israel aerial dominancy, or if you want, superiority in the skies over Iran. In other words, yesterday, the Israeli Air Force commander announced that actually Israel has been successfully establishing a controlled aerial corridor. This is something that is enormously significant because what we are looking at right now is that Israel has a free, almost undisturbed ability to fly over Iran and to operate in Iran in different operational modes. What does it mean, different operational modes? It means that if you, before eliminating or crippling the Iranian anti-aerial capacities, the radars, the missiles, and so on and so on, getting to this phase means that you need to operate in a much more sophisticated long-range capacities to lift the plane out of a range of hit. Now they can basically operate freely across Iran as they are doing in the last almost 48 hours. This is, of course, very significant because basically right now, Iran, to a large extent, is totally exposed to the Israeli Air Force capacities. And as you probably know, the attacks are continuing on different sites and assets of the Iranian regime. So this is, roughly speaking, the military, I would say, logic that was guiding the Israeli attack thus far. And what we see right now, obviously, and as expected, we are witnessing right now a situation where we are in a phase of exchange of slabs, but differently from the one in 2024 when Israeli retaliation was one and done. What we see right now is a situation where, on the one hand, Israeli Air Force is freely operating in the sky of Iran continuously, 24/7, around the clock, while at the same time the Iranian regime is using its major card, and this is the card of the ballistic missiles, the drones that the Iranian regime is using, as you probably know, targeting Israeli cities for the last couple of days. There are different estimations regarding the Iranian ballistic missiles capacities. I hear different figures. I think that we are looking, roughly speaking, today at a depot of about 1,000 and maybe more Iranian ballistic missiles, with, of course, thousands, of course, of unmanned aerial capacities that we have witnessed. The Iranian regime supplied the Russians with those drones in the war with Ukraine. We are familiar with that challenge as well. One of the major challenges that the Israeli Air Force is right now engaged in constantly in the context of that threat is to target the two, I would say, volatile or the two vulnerable component of this whole Iranian military infrastructure. One is the depot of those missiles, that many of them are stored beneath the ground, but also at the same time targeting the launchers. The launchers are an enormously critical component. It is estimated that the Iranians have something like a couple of hundreds of launchers. Some of them are mobile on the ground, on the surface. Some of them are under the ground. The process of launching the missiles for itself is quite a long process. It takes time to fuel the missiles and so on and so on. As long as the process is done above the surface of the ground, it is relatively easy for the Israeli jets and surveillance capacities to locate those launchers and intercept them. The more it's being done under the ground, it's more complicated. But once Israel has been gaining an aerial control, so to speaking, over the Iranian sky, obviously that facilitates the effectiveness of the Israeli Air Force to operate in Iran. That may, and I'm very cautious here, that may explain the fact that in the end of the day, when you look at the amount of missiles and intensity of missiles launched by the Iranians towards Israel, you see that relatively speaking, it is less than was expected. When you look back in 2024, when there was two episodes of Israeli-Iranian collision that were kind of like one and done, the Iranian basically suffocated or saturated, so to speaking, the Israeli defense system by launching hundreds of missiles simultaneously. By the way, synchronizing it at the same time with swarms of drones that have been launched from Iran. The drones that are launched from Iran, it takes about 10 to 12 hours to the drones to reach from Iran to Israel. Ballistic missiles launched from Iran to Israel, it's a matter of about 10 minutes. So it has to be synchronized so they will all reach at the same time. The Iranian military logic beyond it, one of the things is that it is saturating the Israeli defense systems, and basically the Israeli defense system is unable, according to that logic, to deal with this whole incoming missiles. Each and every one of those missiles is loaded with hundreds and hundreds of pounds of explosives. As you can understand and know, they could cause a significant damage and cause death as well. So this is the situation right now from a military perspective, roughly speaking. I'm sure that you are all familiar that in the last couple of days, there has been unfortunately episodes where Iranian missiles were able to penetrate through the Israeli defense systems, causing damage, resulting in killing of Israeli citizens. And at the same time, as I mentioned before, Israel is increasing and intensifying its operation in different parts of Iran. In the last couple of hours, interesting reports coming in indicating that Israel is starting to move more and more towards domestic infrastructures, not only the per se military infrastructure, but domestic infrastructures, namely particularly fuel depots and gas that are domestically used. As of now, to the best of my knowledge, Israel is refraining from attacking Iran's most significant asset, I would say, and this is the oil facilities in Iran, but trying more to remain in the domestically used facilities. That is further resulting in a more chaotic situation in Iran. Reports are coming in from Iran in the last couple of hours indicating there is a flee of people from Tehran and other major Iranian cities because of the fact that Israel is actually almost freely operating right now in Iran's sky. And that brings us to the concluding part of my presentation, talking about where are we going, what is expected to happen, looking ahead. I think that at this point we can still look at a situation of further escalation and expansion. Now, when we look at this issue of escalation and expansion, I think that from both sides you see different tactics, I would say, in that regard, or estimated to be different tactics. From the Israeli side, I think that what we are looking at is, again, going back to the fact that Israel has been establishing this controlled aerial corridor that enables the Israeli Air Force to operate almost freely over the Iranian sky. The meaning of that is that we see, and we already see that, um, widening, verifying, and intensifying Israel's attacks on different assets of the Iranian regime that happens in different locations in Iran, which is very significant. Iran is an enormously big state. It's about 60 times or more the size of Israel. This is one thing that we witness on the ground. On the other side, from the Iranian side, we may witness an Iranian tactic or calculated Iranian tactic where the Iranian will try to spare, sort of speaking, their missiles in a sense that they will kind of like conduct a more economic, quote unquote, use of the missiles that they are launching in Israel for two major reasons. One, the more Israel is continuing and expanding and intensifying its capacity to attack the depots of the missiles, the launchers in Iran, obviously it is reducing the Iranian capacity to continuing to launch large numbers of missiles from Iran. And the other thing is that as part of looking ahead, the Iranian regime probably would like to preserve capacities to continue until the final moment of exiting this conflict to continue and maintain military capacity or their capacity to continue and to fire ballistic missiles. Unfortunately, in that regards, the Iranian has a great advantage, and I'm going back to the story of the Houthis in Yemen. You don't necessarily have to shoot hundreds of missiles at the state of Israel or any state just to create a continuing situation of alert. You could shoot a couple of missiles and then you got millions of people running in the middle of the night or in the middle of the day to their shelters. And by doing that, you get, at least from the attacker side, you get the psychological and propaganda objectives that you may want to achieve. Another thing that we should look very closely is the story of the Iranian proxies. And particularly, we are talking about Hezbollah in Lebanon, Iraqi Shiite militias, and Houthis. Starting with Houthis, Houthis continue their routine, almost speakingly, before the war, and of course, following the war. They are continuing like drizzling, sort of speaking, here and there missiles or drones on Israel. Interesting enough, the Houthis have not intensified their attacks on Israel since the beginning of the war. One of the interesting things is that in the Arab world, there are some sort of like people are looking at the Houthis and say, okay, you are an Iranian proxy. Now Iran, your master, is under attack. You should have been, or you are expected to massively intensify your attacks on Israel. The Houthis are basically saying, well, our attacks on Israel are associated with the story of the war in Gaza, meaning to have ceasefire in Gaza, not necessarily in the context of the situation right now in Iran. Iraqi Shiite militias, today, the commander of those militias made an interesting statement. The bottom line of his statement was, Iran can take care of itself. We know that Iran is powerful. We stand by Iran. Iran can take care of itself. It's very significant because one of the interesting question mark was whether those Iraqi Shiite militias massively supported by Iran and have the capacity to cause damage, whether they're going to join the war. The answer that he gave indicates that as of now, they are basically staying on the sideline. But he also said that if things are going to further develop and the United States is going to become part of that, they will start attacking United States assets and bases across the region, obviously to follow. And finally, talking about Iranian proxies, the most significant one, Hezbollah in Lebanon. In the beginning of my presentation, I talked about how significant was the proxy structure in the whole Iranian triangle of power. And the most significant component in this triangle was the Hezbollah, massively armed by the Iranians with missiles and drones and so on and so on. Hezbollah was the biggest deterrence card that the Iranian regime has in its possession. And according to the Iranian blueprint, in times of test, exactly like where we are right now, Hezbollah was supposed to be the ultimate deterrence card. In other words, remember what I say. In the Iranian blueprint, the purpose of these proxies, in the end of the day, was to prevent, only through deterrence, to prevent even a situation where Israel or any other force is going to attack the Iranians. But that, of course, not happened, because what we see right now is that Israel attacked Iran. And so, going back to what I said before and talking about October 7 and the domino effect and the weakening of the axis of resistance, the most significant component of that was the military defeat of the Hezbollah in the war with Israel. That defeat resulted in today in Lebanon a situation where the Hezbollah is licking his wound, is trying to regroup itself, significantly damaged. The Lebanese government and authorities, the president, the prime minister, and the Lebanese public opinion sent very clear message to the Hezbollah. Do not drag us to this war. We are not part of that. So right now, it seems as the Hezbollah remain also on the sideline, which is very significant, because Hezbollah, though has been significantly defeated, still retain a significant capacities to interfere, to join in, to damage Israel, and so on and so on. By the way, statement by the current leader of the Hezbollah, Naim Qassem, a couple of days ago, obviously condemning Israel, siding with Iran, but he did not say that the Hezbollah is going to join in. Obviously, we'll have to watch and see how things will evolve. It is clear that the Iranian would like to see Hezbollah joining in. It's not happening so far, but we'll definitely have to watch that very closely. Another significant thing is the story of the Iranian regime survival and endurance. In my view, it may be the most significant key code to understand what may be the trajectory or the, if I can use term coming from the medical world, you are coming from the prognosis, sort of speaking, of the current situation. The bottom line is that if the Iranian regime will come to the conclusion that it is getting close to a situation where its survival, its endurance as power, as an ideology, is at stake or jeopardized, that will definitely, I would say, be the most significant component in the calculation of the Iranian regime, to what extent they are going to be willing to compromise, and that will dictate, in the end of the day, their approach when they will go back at some point to the negotiation table. We have here some very significant precedent that we should take into consideration. When this regime came to power in the late 1970s, in the 1980s, the regime and its founder, Ayatollah Khomeini, were engaged in an 8-year brutal war with Iraq. And the regime for a long period of time refused to compromise. They refused to back up. It was a devastating war, as you could understand. But in the end of the day, when the regime came to the conclusion that it is facing a situation where its own survival is at stake, the leader back then, the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khomeini, made a decision to compromise. This is something that has been deeply embedded or imprinted in the inner code of the regime under the title of drinking the poisoning portion. It was a bitter pill that the regime had to take. We may get to a similar situation today as more as the war escalates and intensified. And this is enormously crucial, because in the end of the day, this will be the major thing that I would say dictate the way that the Mullah regime will calculate its actions ahead. And I would say that in that regard, there are voices that are basically saying that maybe the non-proclaimed purpose of this war is to bring down that regime. If this regime will go down, it's a good news, I would say, to the world. I'm not so sure that currently we are there. I know that there are some voices that basically argue that there are indicators that we are there. I don't see that yet, but we should take into consideration that the cumulative impact of the widening, intensifying of the military move, together with the fact that many of the Iranians are very resentful of the regime, and together with the fact, which is very significant, that for the first time, actually, for the last couple of decades, the regime is clearly viewed as totally vulnerable and penetrable because the Israeli intelligence was able to go deep and wide across its different structures. All those things together could result in the end of the day, a domino effect inside Iran. But as of now, we are still very early on this process. And that brings me to the final component, which is, of course, what is the end game here? And there are different components, there are different perspectives. Some people are talking about eliminating the Iranian nuclear project. I think that the bottom line, the answer for that, it is not really doable from different perspectives for different reasons. Some people are talking about bringing this regime to an end. Again, it may happen, but currently the way we see that, as of now, day 3 of this war, we are still definitely not there. It seems like the overarching understanding is that the end game here, in the end of the day, is that the regime will come back to the negotiations with the United States and Western powers, and particularly Trump administration, in a much weaker position, to the point the regime basically will have to a large extent come to terms or subscribe with conditions that have been set by Trump administration. And finally, I want to make last one comment about Trump himself in the context of this situation, because I think it's very significant. The underlying approach or the underlying assumption is that when the day will come and the regime goes back to the negotiations with Israel, Trump administration will be 100% synchronized and coordinated with Israel, with the Israeli government and with Israel's interest. I do want to leave this issue under a question mark. The way or the reason I'm doing this, because in the end of the day, we should take into consideration that Trump has different agenda, different priorities, different perspectives that are not necessarily 100% overlapping with what we think it should be overlapping with. The example that I can give you, the story with the Houthis. A couple of months ago, for long weeks, United States has been engaged in a military confrontation with the Houthis, and then out of the blue, overnight, Trump ended that whole military campaign, and I can tell you that the Israeli government was totally taken by surprise, and not only the Israeli government was totally taken by surprise by that move of Trump. So I think one of the most significant things that we should bear in the back of our minds is, will be there a total comprehensive overlapping position between Trump and the Israeli government? I leave that right now with a question mark. At this point, ladies and gentlemen, I'm concluding my presentation and opening this session to your questions.
Wow, Avi, this was a fantastic review. Thank you for that. And I also know from my end for yourself that this has been pretty much nonstop 72 hours for you, being interviewed and talking and, speaking with your sources. And so we know that it's not been easy for you. And thank you for all that you've been doing in the last 72 hours. Before we start asking the questions, I'll just say that, this has been unbelievable. And it's obviously very difficult to predict what's going to happen. Even like what you just said about Trump, it's very difficult to predict what happens. But we will ask you your opinion. You may not know, or you may, this is your personal best guess. So there is a lot of excellent questions in the Q&A, and we'll try to compile them as much, me and Michelle, as much as possible. The first question, or the bucket of questions, is regarding the prognosis of what you said about the Iranian regime. So people feel that, this war is going to be studied in history as one of the most, regardless of the outcomes eventually, the beginning 24, 48 hours, eliminating so much of what's happening in Iran, the leadership and their defense mechanisms, etc., has been unbelievable. But probably a lot of it is because of the intelligence, including the drone base within Tehran, and including so much more that would have probably been only possible because of collaboration with local people. And from what we hear, there are many, and you mentioned this, there are many, many people in Iran right now who are really tired and sick of the Iranian regime of the Ayatollahs, and they want a change. So if this continues, the worst continues, and let's say something happens, difficult to predict, but the American comes in with the, the bunker buster bombs, and there's more damage, and there's, how do you feel that all this anger, this anguish within Iran is going to play into potentially toppling the regime of the Ayatollahs?
Well, there are two perspectives, roughly speaking, on that specific issue. One says the people come together because they feel that they are under attack. And again, reminding you, I mean, Iranian people are now experiencing what they have not been experiencing for the last 40 years. They're experiencing explosions and attacks and panic and running to shelters that they don't really have, all the things that come along with it. Ironically speaking, tragically, this have been the regular menu, so to speaking, of millions of people across the region for the last 40 years, but not the Iranians, because the Iranian regime was inflicting that death and destruction, while the Iranian people, in the end of the day, were safe and secure. There were no repercussions to Iran. Now they found themselves in this situation. They are, in the end of the day, under attack. So on the one hand, it could basically result in anger and coming around the regime, coming around sense of Iranian pride and nationalism, which may be one trajectory. And then there is another perspective that says that is already going to further fuel, as you mentioned accurately, Yair, talking about the fact that there is an enormous resentment within the Iranian of their brutal regime that has been oppressing them. One thing I would say is for sure, the Mullah regime views at this current situation, and his perspective is not the easy scenario, the friendly scenario, but the Mullah regime looks at the situation and say, I don't like this scenario, because the Mullah regime knows that the people of Iran loathe the regime. So the Mullah regime basic assumption is that the more it continues, the more it's going to fuel these sentiments of resentment. There are, by the way, reports coming from Iran, from different sources, indicating that other than sporadic expressions of some sort of like a protest in Iran, there is clearly an increasing discontent with the whole reality that is being shaped in Iran. And particularly, I want to mention the recent couple of hours reports about, people are fleeing from Tehran, the capital of Iran. And so we are looking at a situation that the prognosis is under a question mark. But if you ask me, I would say that the bottom line, it is more likely to further fuel resentments and anger and already existing notions of resentment towards the Iranian regime. But I don't know to say if that's going to be necessarily translated into the capacity or ability to, at this point, and I emphasize at this point, to result in a grassroots movement that basically will speed up the process of the downfall of the Iranian regime, at least not at this point.
Also, I hear you saying that this may not be a game changer within Iran. I was leading up to saying it sounds like this is a game changer, but you're saying it may not be because they may not have the capacity to make that level of change within. So now I wonder if this is a game changer outside of Iran in the Western world. Do you think the world is going to recognize the role that Israel is playing in essentially protecting the Western world? Is this a game changer for Israel's image in the Western world and the anti-Israel hate that we've been fighting so desperately for the past year and a half and beyond?
Well, it's a very difficult question to answer because there are different layers to that story. I mean, there is the layer of the public opinion, there is the layer of the governments. I would like to take us to an interesting example that is not necessarily connected, but I think to a large extent it is connected. You may all remember the contest of the Eurovision Song Contest, the recent one. The Israeli song, on a popular level, won an enormous support. But on the governmental levels, the dominating notion was this anti-Israel criticism of Israel and so on and so on. I would not be surprised if we see something parallel in the context of the Israeli attack on Iran. I have no doubt in that regard that in the end of the day, look, the Western powers knew exactly the danger of the Iranian regime and not from yesterday. But the bottom line was that the Western powers, for different reasons, chose to conduct a policy, some people call it an appeasement policy, hoping that being rational with the regime will result in a positive outcome. Unfortunately, and I was one of many people, experts, that basically were very skeptic about this whole policy. I wish we were wrong, but we were not wrong. So this is one thing in that aspect. In other words, you may hear Western powers or others that are repeating the regular slogans of self-restraint and then going to condemning Israel for violating the sovereignty of a state and so on and so on. This is the governmental level. There is the public level, which I think is quite different. And by the way, talking about outside of Iran, Michel, as you mentioned, also the region. I'm looking at the reactions of the region. I'm hearing people across the region. It's the same story. Arab governments are expressing, condemning Israel, all the right rhetoric as far as they are concerned. They are going out of the way to demonstrate that they stand by the Iranians, not because they like the Iranian regime. They are petrified by the Iranian regime. They have suffered a lot from this regime, this brutal regime, but they are having a formal policy. In the back room, I can promise you, they shed no tears. Actually, they would like
They're
to see this
high-fiving.
regime. Exactly, and they would like to see this regime evaporating in the air as much as possible. On the public level, by the way, which is not surprising, I can tell you, talking to Syrians and Lebanese and other people from the region, they are basically celebrating. They are basically saying to Israel, finish the job. Because again, I'm going back to the beginning of my presentation. We should remember that it's very significant. This is a regime that has inflicted an enormous death and destruction across the Middle East. Not only Israelis, particularly Palestinians, Syrians, Lebanese, Yemenites, Iraqis. So you can understand that there is a lot of animosity towards the regime in the region, let alone inside Iran itself, as we mentioned before.
I think before I go to the next question, just to make a comment or a question of a friend of mine from the area here, Boaz, and he's basically saying, what do you think the implication of the Iran-Israel war is gonna be on the rising anti-Semitism and the safety of the Jewish communities? And it's really important because the majority of the people on this call are Americans. And we see in the last few weeks, Michelle is dealing with this mostly and leading so many, and Yael, the president of the AJMA, have been leading so many initiatives against anti-Semitism in healthcare, which is exploding. We see it in schools, in our school district, the public school, just in the last few weeks. All that we hear is Heil Hitler, Nazi salutes. We have to eradicate all the Zionists. It is growing. We've seen, of course, the violence, the governor of Pennsylvania, the Colorado, the DC, and there's growing fear. So I think that his question is very valid. We don't exactly know what's going to happen. How is this going to affect this rise of anti-Semitism that is masquerade as it's not anti-Semitism, it is anti-Zionism, but it's very much anti-Semitism. So I don't know if you want to address this, but I think it's a valid point.
It is very valid point. Let's say something like that. Look, for those factors in the West that are anti-Semitic, basically everything for them, it doesn't really matter because they don't really need an excuses to express their anti-Semitic, as you said, under the masquerade or the cover of anti-Israel or criticism on Israel. These are factors that I don't think that we really have the tools, the ability, or the energy to deal with because they're not going to change them. But here is something that I think is enormously significant to notice in the context, and I want to emphasize here, in the context of the Arab/Muslim anti-Israel voice in the West. Arab/Muslim anti-Israel voice in the West. And they are trying to distinguish themselves from the anti-Semitic because it doesn't come across well according to their perspectives. They want to come across as anti-Israel and so on and so on. The current situation in the context of the Israeli-Iran is very interesting because most of those in the States or in the Europe, I'm talking about the Arabs one, are Arabs. They know very well the disaster that the Iranian regime has inflicted upon their own brothers and sisters across the Middle East. You know, for example, there has been this figure, Daoud Khalil, or Muhammad Khalil, I don't remember exactly his name, the Syrian original guy that basically was deported because he was leading this anti-Israel rhetoric in campuses. This guy is Syrian. Syria has been destroyed by the Iranian regime and its proxies. So it will be interesting to see when you are confronting those anti-Israel Arab components that are trying to present themselves in the context of anti-Israel, it will be interesting to see whether they will take a much more proactive stand or they will kind of like try to remain on the sideline because they know that the Mullah regime is the one that in the end of the day responsible to a lot of death and destruction across the Middle East at the expense of their own brothers and sisters, including particularly the Palestinians. And in that component, I will add something else that I mentioned. I want to re-emphasize that. One of the major slogans of those anti-Israel rhetoric, again, I'm not talking about the anti-Semitic, I'm talking about the anti-Israel rhetoric, and one of its most powerful slogans is the story of resistance. It has been echoed in campuses, it has been received in some intellectual circles. It's a slogan that has been romanticized to use against Israel because it sounds very romantic. This is a moment which is very significant in the context of dealing with this anti-Israel rhetoric by making yet again to people understand that the resistance, this is the banner that the Mullah regime, the Iranian regime has been carrying around, that inflicted an enormous death and destruction across the Middle East. So that could be an interesting moment to try and to break this unholy connection that has been established between this slogan, that by the way also is being used by anti-Semitic factors, but mostly by those anti-Israel factors, to break this connection between that and between the effectiveness of that slogan that has been unfortunately quite compelling or appealing to different circles in the West. So I think that when we try to assess the ramifications of that, that will be very interesting to see how those anti-Israel factors are going to deal with the story of the Mullah regime in Tehran. Will they be associating themselves with that? Will they distance themselves from that? And if so, what's going to be the ramifications on the context of anti-Israel rhetoric and activities that we have been witnessing since October 7?
That is a very helpful perspective. That's an interesting perspective. It'll be unbelievable to see if they can still align themselves with the regime as part of this.
And that has to be part of the discussion. It has to be part of the discussion.
So we know that there are several different types of targets Israel has been going after, right? We know they've been going after the nuclear sites, the leadership, and then the scientists. There were several questions. Talk about those as the targets and what each kind of means. But also there was a lot of questions about the strategic position or positive or negative of the idea of assassinating Khomeini.
Look, doing something like that obviously is a very, very significant move. I don't think that this is something that has been currently at the table, and I'm not so sure it's going to be on the table for the future to come. In that regard, by the way, an interesting note, there has been reports that among the senior Iranian commanders eliminated, one of them was the leader of the Al-Quds force. Al-Quds force is the spearhead of the Islamic Revolutionary Guards. Al-Quds force is the force, the unit that basically orchestrates all the activities of the Iranian proxies. In other words, it is an enormously strategic significance for the Iranians. The previous leader of Al-Quds force, General Soleimani, was eliminated in January 2020 by United States, back then under the leadership of Trump administration. Right now, following the Israeli first strike in Iran, there has been reports that among the leaders that have been eliminated was the current leader of Al-Quds force. His name is General Kani. He replaced Soleimani. That report has not been formally approved or authorized. Why do I bring that in the context of Khomeini? One of the arguments that I came across talking to some colleague was basically saying it would be counterproductive to Israel actually to take out that specific person. If I'm doing an analogy from that, without going to the reasons beyond, if I'm doing an analogy for that in the context of Khomeini, of Khamenei, the current leader of Iran, I would say to a large extent, I think that would be counterproductive. Needless to say that Khamenei, the current leader, supreme leader of Iran, is viewed in the Arab world as nothing less than the Satan himself. You just have to look at the cartoons scattered in the Arab world. The person is, I mean, this is a person that in the end of the day is in charge of the whole system that has been established in Iran. But I don't think that in the end of the day, at least for now, this is something that is on the table.
I think the next question is more of a prediction game or guessing from you. But again, I'm compiling several questions. This is more the broader global bird's eye view. What do you think that is going to happen after all of this in terms of the Abraham Accords? For example, what you spoke a little bit about what's happening with Egypt and Saudi Arabia and other forces who are looking into what's happening. But what do you expect to happen in terms of the overall area? But also there's some questions in the audience about other forces, other global forces, not only United States, but we know, for example, that Iran has been working with Russia and, for example, giving them many of their army resources, technology of drones, etc. And so there's questions about what's happening with China, with Russia, North Korea, but most importantly, the Abraham Accords in our region. So how do you think it's going to evolve from here?
Well, I'll start with the last part of the question. Definitely. Russia and China, I think that we definitely look at Russia and China as components that are relevant to this whole end of the story. Not clear currently exactly what's going to be the role, but I definitely think that in the end of the day, the sewing or the tailoring of this exit point of this crisis will involve one way or another, clearly Russia in some sort, in the context of dialogue with the United States, maybe also in a direct or indirect contact with the story of the Russia-Ukraine war. I would definitely think that maybe we should expect some interesting tailoring between United States and Russia in that regard. China, interesting reports coming in indicating there is some sort of like supply train, aerial train coming from China to Iran. According to some sources, the Chinese are providing the Iranians with Chinese-made anti-aerial systems. I don't know to authorize this information as of now. It has to be checked and authorized. But definitely remember, in the end of the day, Iran is an enormously significant state, and particularly when you talk from a Chinese perspective, this is one of the biggest providers of oil to Iran. And obviously, you can understand China has a lot of interest, oil provider to the Chinese, and China, of course, has a significant interest to maintain and make sure that the flow of oil will continue undisturbed. As of the question regarding the Abrahamic Accord, we are in a massive tectonic plate movement. And that tectonic plate movement started, roughly speaking, on October 7. I've talked about it, how it, in the end of the day, resulted in what I call the domino effect. One of the most significant things in the context of Israel and the region, in that sense, October 7 was rock bottom for the state of Israel in many perspectives. We are now almost 2 years afterwards. It's very clear to a large extent that already before the current war between Israel and Iran, Israel has been significantly restoring and reestablishing its deterrence capacities. I can tell you today people are looking at the region and what's going on in Iran. Again, I need to re-emphasize it because it's enormously significant. For the last 40 years, the region suffered enormously from Iran. The Iranians suffered nothing. And the people of the region basically, while they have been deported of their houses, killed, and so on, they watched the Iranians sitting safe and sound in Tehran. No one in the region dared to actually confront the Iranian militarily speaking. Reminding you, in 2019, Iran directly attacked Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates. There was no repercussion. The reason for that was that Iran was so successfully, again, going back to the beginning of my presentation, building this triangle of deterrence, the nuclear capacity, the proxies, and the missiles and the drones. And Iran was basically viewed as it was totally immune. Nobody could deal with the Iranians. The same, by the way, applied for its proxies, particularly the Hezbollah. That equation started to experience cracks following October 7. And then the cracks deepened following the defeat of the Hezbollah in the military confrontation with Israel. The cracks further deepened following the two short episodes of confrontation between Israel and Iran in 2024. Today, we are looking at the region that is looking at Iran, and the region says this whole structure is falling apart. And so we are looking at it as an enormously tectonic plate movement. I would definitely say that we could expect, particularly following the amazing fact, and I have to reiterate it, the Israeli Air Force is right now controlling the Iranian sky. This is something that if you said to someone 2 years ago, 5 years ago, people will say to you, you are dreaming. This is craziness. It's not going to happen. More than that, remember, the Mullah regime has been constantly projecting its might with endless parades of missiles and forces and drones. This regime has been viewed as totally invulnerable and untouchable. Now the region is looking at what's going on in Iran. The Israeli Air Force is strolling back and forth in Iran as it wish, basically taking out the Iranian assets. We have to understand the enormous psychological impact it has on the mindset of the people in the region. One of the first translation of that on the most immediate perspective in the context of the question of Israel and the Abraham Accord, definitely it is further increasing Israel's cards, basically re-emphasizing that you are looking at a major power in the Middle East that in the end of the day is a power that you cannot ignore. You want this power to be on your side. You don't want to be on the wrong side when this power is involved.
I think the infiltration of the Israeli intelligence and what they've proven in the region is alone just dramatic and unbelievable. We've had a couple of,
because it's funny because sometimes I got people from the Arab world, I'm constantly, and people says like, are you Mossad? And I'm like, no, I'm not Mossad. Even though I'm speaking, I'm not Mossad. And so they say, how can I join Mossad?
There you go. So sitting here in Israel, I have the most, talk about the crystal ball that I want you to pull out and tell me how long is this going to last. But we've had a couple of questions about the immediate end of this, not just the aftermath, but how can this end? What are the factors impacting the length of the war? Who can come to the negotiating table? We had one question asking whether or not Iran would trust the US to go back to the negotiating table and have those conversations. Is there any form of negotiation that could end this? That's a series of questions, but it's kind of how can this end?
Yes, there is form of negotiations, and I believe that at some point that form will be reactivated. I think it's very clear that in the end of the day, we are looking at a process that aims to bring back negotiation from a different point where they have been so far. There are different factors that each and every of the sides is subject to in the end of the day. And those factors in the end of the day, I think, will be the most significant one in pushing forward towards resuming the diplomatic channel, starting with the Israeli side. Look, Israel is in a situation where, on the one hand, it's very clear that Israel cannot walk out of this whole situation without some substantial achievement that basically not only justify, in the end of the day, the dramatic decision with all the ramifications, but also particularly an achievement that will secure that the Iranian regime will not be able to reach to the point where the issue of developing a nuclear capacity will be once back on the table. So Israel, this is some sort of like a niche that Israel is caught in almost inevitably, because in the end of the day, the purpose is not the war. The purpose is, in the end of the day, to make sure that this threat will not be something that once again will be something tangible. So this is from the Israeli side. The meaning of that from Israel is that Israel needs to continue to sustain a situation where we right now, when Israel is basically under a constant attack, those attacks are targeting the cities and the civilians with all the ramifications that comes along. And as the Israeli chief of staff said very accurately, we are heading difficult times, and it's very clear. We already experienced some examples, unfortunately, of that. Definitely, we should continue and expect that further down the road. It's not going to stop tonight. So this is one from the Israeli perspective. So these are kind of like an inner, I would say, contradicting almost factors that basically have their toll when you are talking about, in the context of the inner Israeli consensus and the inner Israeli decision, what is exactly the exact right exit point. But it's not only Israel. You got Iran. I was talking about the fact that for the Mullah regime in Tehran, the most significant question is it going to result in my downfall? And it's clear that the more that the situation intensified, the more the Israeli attacks intensified and charged heavy toll of this regime, the more it's getting there. In other words, the more the regime will have to basically come quickly to a decision. What is my exit point? Where is the time that I must exit if I don't want to jeopardize my own endurance? These two exit points are not necessarily overlapping. This is one of the major challenges. It may be that the Israeli exit point will be later than the Iranian one, or the other way around. So this is one of the major challenges. Meaning of that is that as long as it's not happening, and none of the sides is able to basically define what is exactly the exit point he wants or willing to be at, you could expect the continuation of the situation. Continuation of this situation has only one meaning on the ground: escalation. And so I think that at this point, since I cannot at this point indicate clearly a situation or circumstances or conjunction of circumstances where each of the sides came to its exit point, the inevitable conclusion at this point is that we are looking at a continuation of the current situation, and the meaning of that is escalation. That's the bad news. The good news, roughly speaking, sort of speaking, is that I think that in the end of the day, one concern that is being expressed, and it's not baseless, it has to be taken seriously, is that we may witness a situation of an exhaustion circle, something that could go endlessly, not negating the seriousness of that and the possibility. I would say that is less likely. I think that we are not looking at something at the style of the Russian-Ukrainian war. I don't think that we are there. I don't think that's the case. But just the same, we are still looking at a period of time. I cannot name it, of course, definitely. Some people say weeks, some people say days. I would say something in between, where we would continue to witness that. But I don't think that we are going to enter this endless circle of violence. I think that we will see a situation where each side could exit and say, I still maintain some military capacities, I still maintain some pressure card. Until that will happen, unfortunately, people will continue to suffer on both sides, in Israel and in Iran.
Avi, I just wanted to share with everybody that on the chat over here, we posted the website of the Inside the Middle East, which is the website and the organization that Avi created with others. And as you can see in his background, Inside the Middle East is one of the books that he wrote, and I would recommend reading it. I think that it's so important to get more information in this crazy times. And he really discusses in this book so much of what we have discussed today that is leading to this war of Iran. Avi, I wanted to thank you on behalf of everybody for joining us again. This has been so amazing and interesting. I wanted also to thank Michelle and Yael, who's also here as one of the audience, for joining and for hosting this amazing seminar. And of course, most importantly, as this is all going, we can't forget the 53 people, hostages that are held in Gaza in inhumane, horrible conditions, and we have to continue thinking and doing everything in our power to bringing them out back home. Avi, is there any last words of hope or tikva that you want to share with us?
Yes, we will exit this situation at some point or another. I think that we will exit a totally new, I would say, landscape of the region. And given the fact that in the last couple of decades, this is a landscape that unfortunately, to a large extent, was enormously negative in many ways, because particularly the major factor that was dictating this violent reality for the last couple of decades was the Mullah regime and its proxies. So we have been to this worst place. I believe that following what happens right now, we will exit a new landscape that I think will be better than the one that we have experienced so far. I do think that we have lots of odds and prospects. We have to be realistic, understanding the challenges, but I definitely think that as part of this tectonic plate movement that I was talking about, I envision that we will exit, in a way, just the title of my recent book, Inside the Middle East, Entering a New Era, that basically was predicting many things, including this war, but I think that we will exit to this landscape following that period of time.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. And we're going to conclude here. Again, if you're interested, all the books, including The Inside of the Middle East, Entering a New Era, that was published 3 years ago. Fantastic read. And toda rabba, everybody, for joining. Sorry that we didn't get a chance to get to all the questions, but this really was truly very, very helpful for me, and I'm sure for everybody else to listen to your words of wisdom. Toda rabba, and good night.
Thank you.
Toda rabba, Avi.
Shalom from
Am
Israel.
Yisrael Chai.
Take care.
Am Yisrael Chai.
Am Israel Chai.